In this video, we're going to get started setting up the project. I'm going to show you everything, absolutely everything you need, right down to the programming language, how to even get that installed that you're going to need to do this project. So even if you have absolutely no experience, which I expect almost none of you have no experience, but if you do have no experience, you've never used Python, you've never built a website, you've never done anything, it doesn't matter. You can still follow along and I'm going to show you everything. So just as a kind of top level overview here, what I'm going to show you in this video is installing Python, installing pip, setting up the virtual environment, installing Django and creating a Django project, setting up Postgres. So we're going to be using Postgres as a database because it's a superior database to SQLite. I'll talk probably more about that when we actually go to installing it. We are going to configure Django to work with Postgres, obviously installing Redis, which we need to have our sockets work correctly. We want to set up Django channels. We want to, that's pretty much it. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video. So let's get started. Oh, actually, one more thing before we start is if you're watching this video on YouTube, there's going to be a link down below that's going to take you to a document that you could follow if you get hung up, and it's going to basically just take you through everything that I'm going to be going through in this video. If you're watching this video on my website, which I suggest you go do, if you're not, if you're watching this on YouTube, go to my website and watch this. It's also free there, don't worry. It'll keep track of your progress and it gives you links to kind of important things that might happen in the lecture, like the one that I'm about to show you right now. So if you want that document to give you all the step-by-steps written out for you, you can watch it on my website and it'll be posted in the lecture notes. So now let's go through that document. So as I said here, the first step is going to be installing Python, and I'm going to be using 3.8.2 because that was the version that I had installed when I started developing this project. I highly recommend you use the same version as me because otherwise you might get hung up on random kind of version issues. So use the same version as me. I highly recommend that, especially if you're a beginner. So I'm going to click this link, go to the bottom of the page where all the downloads are. Now you want to select the version for your system. I'm on a Windows 64-bit system, so I would choose this executable installer right here. So I could just click that. That would download it, and then I would just execute that file and install Python. Obviously, I'm not going to do that since I already have Python installed, but you will need to do that. So once you've kind of done that, first pause this video, do that, and then come back and we'll move on to the next step. So one important thing that you need to remember when you install Python is check your environment variables on Windows. I believe this Python executable file will automatically edit your system environment variables, but if it doesn't, let's just really quickly go over that for you. So environment variables is something that that you can give your system to point it to certain files so that it knows how to find them when you execute stuff. So I'll just show you how to edit them, and then I'll give an example of what that means. So go to edit the system environment variables, click on environment variables, and you want to go in here and you can either go for the variables for Mitch, which is the authenticated user, or go for system variables. System variables is the safe one. Then you want to find path and go to edit, and you want to add a new path if the Python executable or the Python bin is not in here. So if I go through this, I notice that Python is actually not in this list, probably because it's part of the one for my user Mitch. So if I go up to my user Mitch, that's where my Python probably is. And yes, there it is. So you can see there's a bunch of Python things here. What you would want to add is all of these. So you would find where Python is installed. For me, it's programs, Python 3.8, scripts, and then just point to all of these. So I used to have Python 3.6. That's why these are still here. Technically, I could remove those and just use Python 3.8, which is these two right here. So we want to get scripts and then just the main kind of Python directory, although the executable will probably have done that for you automatically. So what you would do is you just click new and then you would write the path in here and then that would be it. Then click OK. So once you do that, you click OK, click OK, click OK. And to test it, to make sure that Python is working on your computer, open up a command prompt or a terminal or whatever the system thing is that you need to open this and just type Python. And if it recognizes that command, then you know you have Python installed and it's ready to use. And we can just quit because all we wanted to do was verify that it was working. So the next step here is installing pip. Pip is, well, I'm not actually even sure how to describe pip. Pip is something that you use. It's a Python package that you use to install other Python packages. Yeah, so right here, pip is the package installer for Python. You can use pip to install packages, basically. So we want to install pip because we're going to be using pip to install things for our project. So up here, I just got to copy this command, and you could open up a command prompt, and you want to do pip install pip. And that's all. And it's going to say to me that my requirement is already satisfied because I've obviously already done this. So you'll have to type that and you'll be ready for the next step. Now, the next is setting up a virtual environment. So when you're doing web development or any kind of development, actually, one thing that you typically want to do is you want to create a virtual environment for your project to live in, so that any like packages or dependencies that you install will be unique to that virtual environment on your system. Because when we build this website, we're going to be hosting it first locally on your computer, on my computer, on whatever computer you're working on. So we want to build a virtual environment for that project to live in, like I said, to encapsulate all the dependencies. So to do this, we just got to follow these instructions. So first of all, navigate to where you want to keep your Django projects. For me, that is the D directory. So if I open this up, I go to the D directory and I go to Django projects. This is where I like to keep kind of my production Django projects. You can keep them wherever you want. This is just where I keep mine. Next, we want to create a folder for the project. So for me, I've already created that, obviously, because I've built this project ahead of time. But I suggest you create a folder the same naming as I have here. So create a folder named Chat Server Playground. And I'm going to do this with a dummy name just to kind of go through it with you. So I'll say Chat Server Playground Dummy. Don't append the word dummy to yours. Just call it Chat Server Playground. I'm just doing this to kind of go through the steps with you. Next, you want to create a virtual environment to run the project in. So typically, as you can read here, I call it VENV for environment, but you can call it whatever you like. Django project environment is fine too, but again, whatever you want to. So if you want to copy my convention and name it VENV, this is the command that you're going to want to type. If you want to name it something else, you would do Python-M VENV and then the name of the virtual environment that you want to give it. Now I'm going to be using this because that's the convention that I use. So first I need to open a command prompt into that dummy directory that I just created here. So you can do that on Windows by just clicking up in here, typing CMD. That's going to open up a command prompt. Whatever you need to do to open a command prompt to that directory that you just created. Now I'm going to type Python-M VENV, click enter. And that's going to create that virtual environment for me. So there we can see that it's done. And if I go back to my directory, there's now a directory in here called VENV. And if I go inside, there's a couple new things. These are basically all of the things that I need to run my virtual environment. So now following the instructions here, I want to go into VENV. So let's open up the command prompt and do CD VENV. So I'm navigating to that directory in the command prompt. Now I want to activate that virtual environment. On Windows, I do that by doing scripts/activate, but it's different depending on your system. So Linux is source bin activate. Mac, I think, I don't have a Mac, but from what I've looked up, it should be the same. So it's going to be source bin activate. So Windows is kind of the different one. And once you have it activated, you should see this kind of in brackets here. So notice before VENV was not in brackets. After I activated the virtual environment, VENV becomes in brackets, meaning that I've activated this virtual environment. It's running right now. So now anything that I type in here will be executed in the virtual environment. So now let's move to the next step. So the next step here is installing Django. So what I want to do here is I can just copy this. Python-M pip install Django. And the version here that I've chosen for Django is very important. I'm going to talk about that in just a second here. So opening up the command prompt and pasting that in. Whoops, I forgot to copy that. Python-M pip install Django. So pasting that in. Python-M pip install Django 2.2.15. Clicking enter. Now this is going to be installed into my virtual environment, not onto my not onto my system-wide environment, just onto that virtual environment. So while this is installing, I'm going to talk about why I chose version 2.2.15. So if we go to this link right here, djangoproject.com/download, it talks about this thing called an LTS. So if I scroll down, these are all the supported versions of Django, the currently supported versions of Django. We have 2.2, 3.0, 3.1, and so on and so on. Now you'll notice that some of them say LTS, LTS, LTS. Well, what is this LTS thing? LTS means long-term support. And what long-term support means is it's a version that's going to be supported by the Django team for an extended period of time. So if you look at the diagram, there's a bunch of the LTS versions are supported for much longer. So you can see this one's from kind of mid 2019 all the way up to the first third of 2022, whereas the other versions are much shorter. They're not supported for as long. Now you always want to choose an LTS version whenever possible because it's going to be supported for longer. So I'm going to choose the 2.2 version because 3.2 is the next LTS and that's not out till the first third of 2021. So we're going to choose 2.2, which is the current LTS. Another good option, I guess, would have been to choose 3.0 because 3.0 will be the version that will last until the next LTS, but I'm going to use 2.2. I highly recommend using the same version as me because there could be subtle differences, and if you're a beginner, you could easily get hung up on these weird things. So definitely, if you're a beginner, use the same version as me. Okay, so our Django install should be done by now. Yep, there we have it all finished, and we can move on to the next step. So next is creating a Django project. So Django admin, start project, and then whatever the project name is going to be. In my case, it's going to be Chat Server Playground. So if I go to my command prompt here and I type this in, Django admin, start project, Chat Server Playground, and I click enter, that's going to create that Django project for me. So now there's a new directory in VENV called Chat Server Playground. And if I go in here, there's another directory called Chat Server Playground and manage.py file, which is something we use to, run our project and make changes to our project. It's like an administration file, I guess. If I go in here, there's some other basic kind of Django files, settings.py, which is like your project level configuration file, urls.py, which is the URLs for the project level URLs, WSGI, which is the file that hosts or is responsible for building your Django application so that it can be served, and then underscore and init which every Python module needs. You'll see this in every kind of new folder that I create. So that's the basic kind of structure. Now let's move on to the next step. The next step says rename the root directory Chat Server Playground to source. This is a convention that I like to do. So if I go into VENV, I like to rename this source, and then inside of source is kind of where I like to keep my project files. So that way when I open it up with an IDE, I always open it up to the source directory, which you'll see later. So now you should have the following structure, which it says right here, project or Django projects, the project name, VENV, and then source, which is what I have here. So make sure you have kind of the same project structure. All right, so next we need to keep track of the libraries. So when you build any project, generally you want to keep track of the packages or the libraries that you use. Well, Python has an easy way to do that. I can use pip freeze and then store that will automatically gather all of the libraries or the packages that I have installed and save them into a requirements file. So if I go and type that into my command prompt, so pip freeze greater than sign requirements, and I type enter, and if I go back to my project here, if I go back to, whoops, I was actually in the wrong directory for that. Let me delete that requirements file. I should actually cd into source and then do pip freeze requirements. That will create a requirements file right here, which will store all of the libraries that I have installed. So right now, all I have is Django and then pytz and SQL parse, which came installed with Django. So anytime I do any kind of an install, you always want to do pip freeze requirements, and it's going to save any new packages to that file. It makes it easy when you deploy to production because then you can just quickly install all of the requirements as opposed to trying to remember which ones you have installed, which is not a good idea. All right, so now we're ready to run the server and see if it's working correctly. So let's write python manage.py run server, and that's going to run the server locally on our computer. So now I can visit our website, or our soon-to-be website, at this IP address, 127.0.0.1 port 8000. If you see exactly what I see, that means that you've done everything correctly up until now. This is where we're going to work on our development environment. So visit that. All right. So next is the Postgres setup on Windows. As you can see from this, Postgres needs to run as a service on your machine. It needs to run as a service because it's a much more robust database than SQLite, for example. So some of you might have used SQLite. I used it in previous courses. Basically, what I've learned is don't use SQLite because when you go to push something to production, you can't use SQLite. The reason you can't is because it can't handle multiple connections at once. So if you have one user connected to your website, everything's all good. But if you have 100 users or 1,000 users, everything is not good. It can't handle multiple users accessing the database at once. Only one request can be made to the database at any given time, which is really terrible. It's basically useless for production. So Postgres is a great option. It's very easy to use. It's basically the same as SQLite. It can just handle way more, multiple connections, all that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to be using. And in order to use it in development, we have to actually run Postgres as a service on Windows. So that's what we're going to be working on configuring here. So as it says here, Postgres needs to be run as a service on your machine. So we need to download it. So you can go to this link right here, enterprisedb.com, downloads, and go to the Postgres section. And you need to download the one for your system. I think I'm using 10.14. Let me just double check. 86, 64-bit version 10. Yeah, so it should be 10.14. And then whatever your system is. So let's keep this. And as soon as this is done, I will execute. Okay, so hopefully this lets me go through this executable even though I've already installed it, because there are some important things which I have written here, but I want to make sure that you get it all correctly. So it's going to do its thing. I'll pause the video and get to the point when you actually need my help. All right, welcome to the Postgres wizard. Next, and I can click all of those. Yes, I can click next, sure, next. Now ready to begin, next. Once you have finished the installation, you should be looking at what I'm looking at here. Just going to click finish. Once you're done the installation, you should be looking at something like this. I actually accidentally installed Stack Builder. We don't need this. So I'm just going to press cancel and close this Stack Builder thing. Now to make sure that Postgres is up and running on your computer, on Windows, I'm going to type services, and we are going to look for the Postgres service. So there we have Postgres, and it is running. If it's not running, you would just hit start up here to run the service. And we can check if it's running also by logging into it now. So if I open up a new command prompt, it doesn't need to be at any particular place. I'm now going to log into my Postgres database. So PSQL, Postgres, Postgres. So what I'm doing is I'm logging in with the user Postgres to the database named Postgres. So if I type that, now here's where I need to type that password that you typed in during the installation process. So as I said, that was very important to remember. So I'm just going to type my password and log in. And now I'm logged into the Postgres database. So as I have on the document here, here's some useful commands that you might find, useful. Here's how to list all of the databases. So just \L. So if I type \L, that lists all the databases that I have. So you can see I have a whole bunch. I have Coding with Mitch, Chat Dev, Django database, a bunch of different databases. So that's how to list your databases. And each project should have its own database. So if I wanted to connect to a database so that I could make changes to the table, I would type /c and then whatever that database is. So here, one of my databases was Coding with Mitch Chat. So if I type /c Coding with Mitch _chat, I'm now connected to that database as the user Postgres. Now, if I want to list the tables that are inside that database, I can do \DT for database tables. And I can see all of the tables for that database. I can see the tables and also the owner of those tables, so the user who created those. And that's a very important thing, the user who created the tables. So in order for our Django project to use the Postgres database, we have to create a user and give that user access to the database and reference that user in our Django project. So that's what we're going to do next here. So we want to create a new database for the project. So basically, mine is already Coding with Mitch Chat. That's the one, but I'm going to create a dummy one just to kind of go through this with you. And I actually already created a dummy one when I was planning this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this Coding with Mitch Chat Dev database, and I'm going to rebuild it just so you can follow along and do exactly what I'm doing. So the command here is create database Coding with Mitch Chat Dev. Make sure to get the semicolon in there. So just copying that, I'm going to paste that in. That's going to now create a brand new database that we're going to use for our project. And as soon as it's done, I'm going to do /L again, just so you can see that it was created. So there's that Coding with Mitch Chat Dev database that was created there. Now we want to create a user that can use that database. So you're going to want to type create user Django with password. Now I've already got a user Django with password. So I'm not going to press enter here, or I can, but it'll probably give me a conflict and say it's not going to work. But type create user Django with password. And it says, yes, Django already exists, because I've obviously already created that. So now I want to list all users. So /du will list all of the users. So you can see all the users that I have on my Postgres database. So I have Django, Postgres, and this temp user. You should have Django and Postgres. Next, we want to grant that user privileges to use that new database that we just created. So we want to tell him that he can use this database, Coding with Mitch chat dev. So I'm just going to copy this, go to the terminal, paste that in. Oh, it automatically executed. Okay. So grant all privileges on database, Coding with Mitch chat dev to the user Django. Now I want to disconnect from the database or disconnect from Postgres, so get out of here completely. And now I'm going to connect with that new user. So right here it says PSQL. I want to reference the database and then the user that I'm going to connect to that database with. So PSQL, database name, and then the user Django. So if I type that, PSQL, Coding with Mitch chat dev, and then Django, click enter, it's going to ask for my password. Remember, my password is just password. I created that, and boom, there we go. I'm connected to that database as the user Django. So now that we have a database special for just our project, now we want to configure the Django project to use that database and be able to access it through that user that we created. So let's get started with that. Okay, so on to the next step here, we have Django and Postgres setup. So first we want to install PSY, I don't know how to say this, PSYCOPG2, I don't know, but that's how Django uses Postgres. It's a package required for Django to use Postgres. So if I open up our command prompt, I have a whole bunch open here. Make sure to activate the virtual environment, of course, and then type pip install and then that package name. So now this is going to install into our virtual environment. Now, as always, whenever we install a new package, you want to do pip freeze requirements.txt. That will again save those requirements. So if I go into source and look at our requirements, now notice that new package is included into that notepad file. Again, this is for when we push to production. It makes it much easier to configure things. Now we're going to update the settings.py file to include the Postgres configuration. So now I'm going to open this project using Sublime Text. This is my text editor of choice. This is how I like to edit my web development stuff, I guess. If you have never used Sublime Text, you don't have to. You could use anything. You can use Visual Studio Code. You can use PyCharm. That's another good one, a popular one. I prefer to use Sublime Text. So do what you like. I'll show you how to install it really quick, just in case you do actually want to use Sublime Text. So you can just type Sublime Text into Google, and it should be like, the first link here. And you can either download kind of the trial version, I guess, or you can buy it. I bought it because this is what I do for a living, so I don't mind spending money. But if you don't want to buy it, there is a trial version, so you can download it and try it. The reason I like Sublime Text is because it's so lightweight. It's so fast. It's basically Notepad, but with some highlighting features. So it's basically Notepad, but it will highlight nicely. Like it'll highlight JavaScript, HTML, Java, Kotlin, whatever. It'll highlight whatever language you're using. So that's why I like it. So again, use whatever you like. I'm going to be using Sublime Text. So let me open the project with Sublime Text, the one that we just created. So if I go to Django projects, go to the dummy project. Again, I like to open the source directory. That's why I named it source. So that's going to open up my project. And now I have everything that I need here. We can also delete this SQLite file because we are going to be using Postgres. So I can delete that. Now we want to go into settings.py and we're going to edit. We're going to add the database configuration for Postgres. So if you go back to that document that I linked, this is what you're going to want to paste into there. So pasting that and then paste over top of the databases section here. So what I did was name the database name, which is Coding with Mitch chat dev. We just created that in our Postgres database. Remember, we did that here. We created a database user named Django. That the database user's password is password. And then here's the configuration. So we have the engine, which is that package, that Python package that we just installed. We have the database name, which is a constant, the user, the database password. It's going to be at localhost, so it's hosted on my computer. And then the port for Postgres is 5432. That is all the configuration we need to use Postgres. So now I'm going to press Control S to save that and go back to my document and go and follow the rest of the instructions here. So the next step was to delete the SQLite database, which you saw me do already. And now we want to do something called migrating. So what this does is it tells the Python project, take any anything that it needs to, any changes that you've made to the project, and apply them to the database. That's basically what this is going to do. And because Django comes pre-packaged with a whole bunch of stuff already done, basically that's what it's going to apply to the database. So I'm going to go python manage.py migrate, and you can see that it's applying all of these kind of Django built-in things to my database so that we're ready to use Django. Now that we've done that, I can create a user, our very first user. This is going to be like the super user or the admin. So python manage.py, create super user. That's going to say I need a username. I'll say Mitch, and then I'll give an email address. This isn't really that important. We're actually going to delete this user later once we've built a custom user management system, but just for now you can create that user. Now I'm going to run the server and just make sure that I can log into the admin. So python manage.py run server, and now I'm going to visit I can visit the server first of all, which is just the 127.0.0.1 port 8000, but we want to also make sure that the admin works. So do /admin. So Django comes pre-built with like an admin panel. This is one of the beautiful things about Django. So I can username, so Mitch, and password. So Django comes pre-built with this nice admin panel, and this is you're gonna see this more and more as we progress through the course. We can manage all of our database objects here. So if we click on users, for example, boom, there's that user that I just created named Mitch. If I click on him, I can see his password is hashed into, I can't remember what algorithm is used here, but it's hidden basically. I can change his first name, his last name, and all this stuff is kind of pre-built with Django. But as I said, we're going to be building a custom user management system. So we're going to customize our user objects so that we don't just use kind of the default Django one, but we're going to be doing that later. So now that I know that that works, we are ready to move on to the Redis installation, which is something we need to use sockets later on. So Redis does not work on Windows out of the box, as you can see from this little paragraph up here, but we have this this software that's built, I believe, by Microsoft to get it to work on Windows. I can't remember if it was built by Microsoft or not, but anyway, somebody built it and it makes Redis work on Windows. We need it to manage the socket messages. It acts as like a messaging queue for the sockets. You don't technically need it when we use it in production, but it's a good idea to use it because it's just like it manages the work. It helps to manage all of the connections and the work that's happening with the sockets. So you can just click the free download here, go through the installer, and everything should just work. And again, if once you've installed it, so if you want to like pause the video here and install it, then you want to check to see that it's running as a service on Windows. So there's the Memori service. You can see that it's running. If it's not, then just click the start button and then run that. That's basically all you need to do, and then Redis is working on Windows. So very, very simple. And then the last thing we need to do to get Redis working is we need to configure the Django project to use it. So just copy this channel layers kind of section here. And we're going to go to that settings.py file that we were in earlier and paste in channel layers. And we're just telling it that we're using Redis. The Redis service is running on our local host. And this is the port that it's using, which is the default port. So if I just press Control S on that, that's all good, and we can move on to the next step. Now, the last step after installing Redis is actually setting up Django channels, but I'm not going to include that in this video. It's not really necessary. Technically, the Redis stuff wasn't even necessary right now anyway. So when we actually come to using Django channels and sockets, that's when we'll come and install this stuff. For now, let's just end this video. It's already been a long time getting this project set up. And in the next video, let's take a look at what we're going to be doing. In the next video, we are going to set up our templates. So we're actually going to get started building the website.